For today's class, you will need one sheet of blank notebook paper, you will need a pencil, and you'll need a highlighter if you have one. Today we're going to be talking about the prompt that they will give you for a state test essay. And the prompt is really long. It has 4 paragraphs to it. And it includes a lot of information that you probably already know. So what I'm going to try to do is show you how you can narrow down, ignore a lot of the unnecessary information, and focus in only on the part that you really need to deliver on, which is the action verb itself, the performance verb that tells you what you need to do, and the additional details. So we'll start with the first paragraph. The first paragraph says that you're going to construct a multi-paragraph written response in which you analyze the debate over the origin of the motion picture, including the history of its development and who was responsible for its creation. Your response must be based on ideas and information that can be found in the source set. The second paragraph asks you to manage your time carefully so that you can review your sources, plan your response, write a thorough response, and revise and edit your response. The third paragraph says, be sure to include an introduction, use evidence from the passages to support your explanation/thesis statement, avoid overly relying on one passage, and include a conclusion. Finally, the last paragraph asks you to write your multi-paragraph response in the space provided. Now, I'm going to break this down backwards. We just read it from first to last. I'm going to take it back from last to first. Hopefully, you'll see why in a moment. So the first piece of information they give you is to write your paragraph in the space provided. In other words, they're not going to let you write it on a separate sheet of paper and turn that in. You have to actually type it into the space. And that's kind of a disclaimer on their part that says, hey, we're not accepting anything that's not typed in the right spot. Do you need that information? No, you really don't. So I'm going to block that out. Let's look at the third paragraph. The third paragraph says, be sure to include the introduction, use the evidence, avoid overly relying on one passage. In other words, use information from all the passages that you get, and to include the conclusion. So introduction, body, conclusion, evidence. That's really what it's telling you. Do we need an extra hint to tell us to do that? We really don't. We can block all that stuff out. And now we've taken out almost half of the prompt. The second paragraph says, manage your time carefully, and tells you what to do with that time. We know all of that stuff. We are practicing all of that stuff. Again, that's stuff we don't necessarily need to pay attention to when we're trying to figure out what we're supposed to be writing about. We can block it out. And when we look at the prompt, we are now looking at the fact that we have 3 of the 4 paragraphs completely blocked out. We don't need the information from those. So let's take a look at the first paragraph. The first paragraph has embedded within it your prompt, but even the first paragraph has information you don't need. It's going to tell you to construct a multi-paragraph written response in which you and every prompt in the state of Ohio says that. Everyone says those words. Do we need those? No, we don't need to pay attention to those. It also is going to give you a last sentence that says your response must be based on ideas and information that can be found in the source set. Do we need that? No, we already know that stuff. So what's left? This, starting with the performance verb analyze, tells us what our prompt is. Analyze the debate over the origin of the motion picture. That's what your 2 text sets were about. The origin of the motion picture, including the history of its development and who was responsible for its creation. The word analyze tells you that you are going to be writing an informative piece. In fact, the last 8 years, the 4 prompts that I can find that were released materials that were informative writing prompts, all used the verb analyze. When you get an argumentative prompt or an argument to write, it's always going to tell you to make and support a claim. So even though this prompt right here says the word debate, It's not telling you to pick a side. It's not telling you to make and support a claim. It's asking you to analyze. And analyze is the important thing here. That's what tells you what type of writing you need to do. So when we look at this entire prompt, the only thing we need there is part of one sentence that says, analyze the debate over the origin of the motion picture, including the history of its development and who was responsible for its creation. It tells you what you need to do, tell us about both sides of the debate, and it even tells you what information you need to include, history of development, who was responsible. The performance verb analyze. This is an important one that we need to look at. Divide the topic into separate parts and show relationships between these parts. So, what I would be doing is going back through the article and looking at the things where you get important information that tells us about the history of the development of the motion picture, as well as who developed it, and go back through, and then you're going to compare those two to each other. So it's almost going to be like a compare and contrast essay. So analyzing requires acute or sharp observation and detailed description. Analytical essays often use classification, which may not be too useful here. Compare and contrast, which certainly will be. Definition and or cause and effect for development. So you could set this up either as a compare and contrast or as a cause and effect. Either one of those would be okay. Because it's informative, we know that we are going to have the triangle that tells us introduction. We have a main point. We have a second main point, and we have that second paragraph, or I'm sorry, the second triangle there that is our conclusion. Now, when we did it as an outline, we were looking at it more like this, where it was the introduction included the hook, the bridge, and the thesis. The main point included the topic sentence, 2 to 3 pieces of evidence, and a summary. The main point number 2 also included, the topic sentence, evidence, and a summary. And then you had the conclusion, which had you restating the thesis as well as callback to the hook. Finally, this is going to serve as your graphic organizer as you write. Friday, your job is to write the entire essay during class time and be done with it with a complete introduction, body, and conclusion before the end of the class period. So you're going to have to get right to work. You're going to have to be prepared. You're going to have to be organized. And then you need to write an entire thing. The conclusion is extremely important. The state will significantly downgrade your score if this is not finished, if it doesn't have a conclusion. So you need to save yourself a solid 10 minutes at the end to write the conclusion, go back through and make sure you have introduction, body supported with evidence, and conclusion.